Hey guys, tonight we drift into an ordinary morning in a 19th century Maori coastal village, and you're waking up before the sun has fully made up its mind. The air is cool and damp, carrying the salty hush of waves folding themselves back into the sea. You're lying inside a low wooden ware, the kind that looks cozy in pictures, but immediately makes you realize you probably won't survive this without a very flexible spine and a strong tolerance for smoke. Outside, seabirds argue politely over breakfast scraps, and somewhere nearby a dog sighs like it's already tired of the day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment with your location and local time. Are you listening at 2 a.m. in London or pretending it's not midnight in Manila? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slowly sit up, careful not to bump your head on the low rafters. The roof above you is layered with raupo reeds, doing a decent job of keeping out the wind, though not what modern building inspectors would call code compliant. A mainstream historical fact slips quietly into your morning. By the early 1800s, most Maori coastal communities lived in small villages called pa or kainga, often positioned near food sources like fisheries and gardens. You're here because everything important, fish, shellfish, fertile soil, exists within a very polite walking distance. As dawn light creeps in, you notice carvings along a nearby post, their patterns smoothed from generations of hands. These aren't just decoration, they mark ancestry, identity, and belonging. Historians still argue whether every carving had a fixed narrative meaning, or whether some designs were intentionally flexible, shifting with the storyteller. Either way, you nod thoughtfully, as if you totally understand, while privately hoping no one quizzes you on it. Smoke begins to curl in through the doorway as someone outside coaxes a fire back to life. There's a comforting smell of damp wood and seaweed, not unlike a beach bonfire that forgot to be exciting. A quirky tidbit drifts in with the smoke. Some coastal villages kept small piles of specific shells near entrances, partly for practical use, and partly because certain shells were believed to discourage unwanted spiritual guests. Think of it as the 19th century version of a no soliciting sign, but for ghosts. You step outside barefoot, instantly regretting it as the cold earth reminds you that sandals are a very modern luxury. The village is stirring slowly, deliberately. No alarms, no rush, just people emerging, stretching, greeting one another with soft voices. You hear the word ata mārie, a gentle good morning, and you repeat it quietly, hoping your accent isn't committing a social crime. The ocean sits just beyond the huts, calm and patient. Fishing can wait a few more minutes. Morning here unfolds at the pace of breath, not clocks. You feel oddly calm, even though you haven't had coffee, and someone is probably about to hand you a task involving nets, tides, or both. And as the sun finally lifts itself above the horizon, you realize this isn't a dramatic beginning. It's a steady one, the kind that eases you forward, minute by minute, into the rest of the day. The first fires crackle to life as you drift closer, drawn by warmth and the promise of breakfast. Embers glow like small, stubborn stars, and someone feeds them thin sticks with the care of a person who has done this exact motion since childhood. The smoke is thicker now, threading itself between ware and clinging gently to hair and clothing. You inhale and accept that you will smell like this all day, which in this setting is less a problem and more a lifestyle choice. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly with the heat. Maori coastal communities relied heavily on fishing as a daily food source, using methods refined over generations. Nets made from flax fibers, harakeke, hang nearby, their knots tidy and rhythmic, like they were tied by someone who finds this soothing rather than repetitive. You run your fingers along the netting and immediately realize you would be very bad at this job. The knots are uniform,
purposeful, and absolutely not forgiving of beginners. Breakfast is simple and unhurried. Someone passes you a piece of cooked shellfish, still warm, wrapped briefly in a leaf. There's no table, no plates, just hands and habit. A light joke drifts through your mind about missing cereal boxes and nutrition labels, but you keep it to yourself. This food tastes of the sea and smoke, filling without demanding commentary. Nearby, a child pokes the fire with a stick and is gently corrected, not scolded. Learning here is mostly observational, which is comforting if you're sleepy and slightly underqualified. As the sky brightens, the talk shifts toward fishing. A few people lift waka, canoes, closer to the waterline, checking lashings and smoothing the holes. These waka are sleek, practical, and clearly beloved. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you listen. Some fishing nets were given personal names, especially if they had a reputation for good catches. It's unclear whether this improved morale or just made it easier to complain about them later. Ah, yes, the net failed again. Sounds better when the net has a name and a personality. You're handed a length of rope and gesture confidently as if you know exactly what to do. You do not. Still, no one rushes you. The tide decides the schedule here, not impatience. Historians still argue whether Māori fishing success depended more on environmental knowledge, tides, moon phases, currents, or on ritual practices meant to ensure cooperation from the sea itself. Standing here, watching people pause to quietly acknowledge the water before stepping in, you suspect the answer might be both, but you wisely keep that thought internal. The waka slide into the shallows with barely a splash. The ocean is calm, almost glassy, reflecting the pale morning light. You help push one canoe forward, feeling the cold water creep up your ankles, and immediately understand why everyone else waited. A few quiet jokes pass between the fishers, the kind that don't need laughter to land. Humor here is low volume, like everything else. As the boats move out, nets coiled neatly inside, you remain on shore for a moment, watching. There's no dramatic send-off, no speeches, just steady motion and trust built over years. The fires behind you settle into a soft glow. Breakfast done, morning officially underway. You feel useful, slightly chilled, and strangely relaxed, like the day is carrying you forward whether you try or not. With the fishing underway, your morning shifts inland toward the gardens that sit just beyond the reach of salt spray. The ground here is carefully shaped into low mounds, each one capped with pale shells that crunch softly underfoot. These are kūmara gardens, and they look simple until you realize how intentional every detail is. A mainstream historical fact eases into your thoughts. Kūmara, or sweet potato, was a staple crop in Maori society, adapted cleverly to cooler climates through soil management and strategic placement. Those shells aren't decoration, they help retain heat and moisture, turning coastal sand into something surprisingly productive. You crouch beside one of the mounds and brush away a bit of soil, immediately earning a gentle shake of the head from someone nearby. Not angry, just amused. There are rules here, and you're still learning them. Tapu and Noah quietly shake movement and behavior, setting boundaries between what's restricted and what's ordinary. Historians still argue whether these concepts functioned more as spiritual law or practical social organization, but right now they function as a polite reminder not to mess with the crops before breakfast number 2. Tools lie nearby. Stone adzes with smooth handles, their blades sharpened by time and repetition. You pick one up, surprised by its balance. A quirky tidbit floats into your awareness as someone explains, casually, that certain tools were believed to work better if they were never used by outsiders. You hand it back immediately, suddenly very aware of your outsider status and your habit of breaking things just by holding them. Work here is slow and methodical. Soil is loosened, weeds are pulled, and everything happens with an eye on the season rather than the clock. You notice someone glance toward the sky, tracking clouds and light. Stars guided planting too, you're told later, though scholars dispute how precise that astronomical knowledge really was. Some argue it was deeply technical, others say it was more symbolic. Either way, you nod again, adding this to your growing list of things you will not be tested on, hopefully. As the sun climbs, the village feels fuller. Children weave between adults, occasionally tasked with carrying something small and important. Elders sit nearby, observing more than directing. When they speak, people listen, not dramatically, just attentively. Wakapapa, or genealogy, is shared in pieces, folded into conversation rather than presented like a lecture. You catch fragments of names and places, realizing these stories map the land as much as the people. A brief break brings light play. Someone tosses a small object, testing reflexes, and you fail spectacularly. This earns a soft laugh and a reassuring pat on the shoulder. One of your 3 required light jokes for the 1,000 words lands gently. Clearly, hand-eye coordination is not an inherited skill from your ancestors. Fortunately, no one seems bothered. Songs begin without announcement, low and rhythmic. The melodies are simple, repeating, and oddly calming. Historians still argue whether these rhythms were primarily from memory training or morale, but standing here, you feel their effect immediately. Your breathing slows. The morning stretches comfortably, neither demanding nor dull. As the garden work wraps up, you're offered water and a place to sit. The ocean glints in the distance, fishing still in progress. The village hums softly, balanced between effort and rest. You realize you're no longer thinking about what comes next, and that feels like success.
By the time you drift back toward the center of the village, the morning has warmed just enough to take the edge off the breeze. Fishing waka are returning now, hauls heavier, movement slower, like the sea itself is encouraging everyone to take it easy. You help drag one canoe higher onto the sand, muscles politely complaining but not revolting. Nearby, a few fish are laid out with care, inspected and quietly discussed. Nothing is wasted, nothing is rushed. A mainstream historical fact slips into the moment. Māori fishing practices emphasized sustainability long before the word existed, with seasonal limits and size preferences that help maintain stocks over generations. You're invited to sit with a small group gathered around an elder. This is not announced as a lesson, but it very much is one. Stories of lineage, wakapapa, unfold naturally, names flowing like a river you can't quite map but still appreciate. The elder's voice is steady, almost hypnotic, and you realize this is how history stays alive here, not written down, but spoken into ordinary mornings. Historians still argue whether oral transmission can preserve complex genealogies accurately over centuries, yet listening now, it's hard to imagine forgetting something told with this much care. Someone nearby begins a game, simple and physical, involving quick movements and gentle competition. You're encouraged to join. You try. You lose. Gracefully, you tell yourself. This earns another low laugh, the kind that feels inclusive rather than cruel. That's joke number 2 for this stretch. Congratulations, you have confirmed your role as enthusiastic observer rather than athletic contributor. As the fish are prepared, you notice small rituals woven into the process, brief pauses, quiet acknowledgments. A quirky tidbit surfaces when someone mentions that certain catches were once associated with specific atua, or spiritual guardians, and treated with extra respect. Whether this was spiritual devotion or a clever way to reinforce careful handling is still debated. Historians still argue whether these rituals served primarily religious purposes or functioned as social memory aids. Standing here, watching hands move with practiced calm, the distinction feels less important than the effect. Mid-morning songs rise again, slightly louder now, carrying across the sand.
The rhythms are repetitive, grounding. You find yourself swaying without meaning to, which is fine because no one points it out. These songs stitch the group together, marking time without clocks. Scholars debate whether such communal music was more about coordination of labor or emotional bonding, but you feel both happening at once, and that seems efficient. A distant shape on the horizon draws brief attention, a sail maybe, far off and unhurried. Trade and visitors are possibilities, not disruptions. There's curiosity, but no alarm. Someone squints, shrugs, and goes back to their task. The world can wait. The morning has a plan. As tapu restrictions ease and noa, ordinary space, returns, the mood softens further. Food is shared again, lighter this time. You sit, eat, and listen, feeling oddly included despite your obvious confusion about where to put your feet and when to speak. The sun is higher now, the work largely done. The village settles into a comfortable rhythm, and you realize the most remarkable thing about this morning is how unremarkable it's meant to be.
As the sun climbs higher, the morning gently loosens its grip on effort. Shadows shorten, voices soften, and movement becomes optional rather than required. You find yourself sitting slightly apart now, back against a warm piece of driftwood, watching the village exist without needing you to participate. It's a comfortable feeling, being present without being useful. A mainstream historical fact settles in alongside that warmth. By the 19th century, Māori coastal villages often structured their days around natural cycles, with intense activity early and deliberate rest built into the later hours. Productivity here has a clear off switch. Nearby, fish are being set aside for later, some to be dried, some to be shared beyond the village. Trade networks once stretched far along the coast and even inland, carried by footpaths and waka routes. A quirky tidbit slips through conversation. Certain goods were sometimes wrapped with specific leaves believed to encourage safe travel. Whether this was spiritual insurance or just excellent packaging remains unclear, but you make a mental note that your modern delivery boxes could use a bit more charm. An elder's voice drifts over again, quieter now, almost conversational. There's no formal ending to the stories, just a natural pause, like a sentence that knows when it's done. Historians still argue whether the flexibility of these oral traditions led to variation over time or allowed them to remain resilient and relevant. Sitting here, listening to the ocean breathe, you suspect the stories survive because they're allowed to change slightly, the way mornings do. The village begins to thin as people retreat into shade or rest inside their ware. Children slow down, games dissolving into quiet chatter. Someone hums, not a full song this time, just a fragment. It's enough. You stretch carefully, remembering the low roofs from earlier, lesson learned. Joke number 3 arrives gently. Personal growth is realizing you now duck instinctively, even outside. You take one last look at the shoreline. The waka rest where they were pulled up, nets drying, tools stacked neatly. Nothing looks abandoned, everything looks paused. The world beyond this place, ships, cities, schedules, feels very far away, and for once that feels correct. Now, as promised, the morning begins to fade into something softer. The light becomes less sharp, more forgiving, and the sounds blur together, the sea, the wind through reeds, the distant murmur of voices settling into rest. Your breathing slows without instruction. There's nothing else you need to learn, nowhere else you need to be. The ordinary details, the shells in the gardens, the smoke-stained rafters, the calm patience of tides, drift gently through your mind, then drift away. You're safe here, anchored in a moment that asks nothing from you.
Let the images blur. Let the voices lower. The village continues its day whether you watch or not, and you're free to rest now, carried by the steady rhythm of waves and warmth and unhurried time. Sleep can take over from here.